There's a peace that doesn't come from circumstances, not from material success, not from the applause of people or the calmness of the environment around you, but from a deep, unshakable knowing God in a way that becomes more real to you than your fears, more tangible than your doubts, and more powerful than your struggles. It is not enough to know about God, to read stories, to hear others testify, to attend services, or recite prayers without heart engagement. True peace comes from stepping into an intimate, conscious awareness of His presence, where your heart beats in rhythm with His promises and your spirit rests in the certainty of His faithfulness. That knowing is not intellectual knowledge, it is experiential revelation knowledge, where you don't just believe He is able, you know He is already working, where you don't just hope He is near, you know He is with you, where fear loses its grip because faith has settled the matter inside you. In this place of knowing God, worry cannot survive, anxiety loses its audience, and doubt becomes a powerless whisper in the background. The world may still shake, storms may still form, situations may still rise against you, but something happens inside, a stillness, a holy calm, a supernatural confidence that says, I know my God, and because I know Him, I know I am safe, I know I am loved, I know I am guided. The peace that flows from knowing God is not passive, it is power-filled. It is a spiritual force that guards your heart and your mind like a mighty fortress that no fear can penetrate. This kind of peace cannot be fabricated by human will or created by mental affirmation alone. It comes when the spirit man takes hold of the reality of God's presence and refuses to let go. Knowing God is not a casual acknowledgement, but a deep relationship built through meditation on His words, communion and prayer, and intentional trust during challenges. The more you meditate on who He is, your protector, your provider, your shepherd, your refuge, the more peace becomes your internal atmosphere. You cannot know Him as the Prince of Peace and remain in turmoil. You cannot walk with the one who commands stillness and continue drowning in panic. When your heart truly knows Him, inner chaos yields to divine order. You start responding differently to life because your focus has shifted from what is happening around you to who is standing with you. Fear tries to rise, but your spirit responds, I know my God. Doubt tries to creep in, but your heart affirms, I know His promises. Anxiety knocks at your door, but faith answers with, I know His voice. There is a reason why many people pray but still feel restless, seek solutions but still remain troubled, listen to spiritual teachings but still battle inner storms. It is because they have not yet transitioned from hearing about God to knowing Him personally. When you simply hear about God, your peace is unstable, dependent on emotional highs and external confirmations. But when you know Him, your peace is a spiritual constant, unbothered by emotional fluctuations. Knowing God is what transforms peace from a temporary feeling into an unbreakable state of being. It makes your heart unshakable, your mind anchored, and your soul rooted. When a child knows the character of their father, they rest in His embrace, not because the storm outside is silent, but because the arms that hold them are strong. In the same way, knowing God allows you to rest not because life has no storms, but because your Father is greater than every storm. This level of knowing produces a settledness that does not need instant answers, does not panic during delays, and does not crumble under pressure. You start walking with a bold calmness, a quiet assurance that no matter what lies ahead, the one who is with you is greater than anything before you. This knowing is not abstract, it is alive, active, and empowering. It releases peace like a river flowing from your spirit into your thoughts, into your emotions, into every decision you make. You stop chasing peace and start carrying it. You stop begging for rest and start living from rest. You no longer allow fear to dictate your choices because your spirit is rooted in divine certainty. This peace becomes your immunity against inner turbulence. It allows you to think clearly when others panic, to move forward when others freeze, to stand firm when others collapse. It is not that you don't feel the pressure, but you refuse to be owned by it because your ownership belongs to the one who is your peace. True peace is found in a deep awareness that God is not an idea but a living presence. You walk through life saying, I know He hears me, I know He sees me, I know He is for me, I know He is working even when I cannot see it. You no longer measure peace by how quiet things are, but by how deeply you trust Him. Knowing God doesn't eliminate battles, but it ensures victory begins within. When peace starts inside, no external storm can shake what God has already solidified in your heart. When you truly know Him, peace is not something you wait for, it is something you walk in. It becomes your internal environment, your daily posture, your spiritual atmosphere. This is the kind of peace that comes not from knowing the future, but from knowing the one who holds it. This kind of peace is not dependent on clarity of circumstances, but on clarity of faith. This is the path to inner peace, the journey of knowing God deeply, intimately, unshakably, until His presence becomes your permanent resting place. Tranquility in the Qur'an, often referred to as Sakinah, is not a mere emotional calm or temporary relief from stress, but a divine descent of serenity that settles the heart with a stillness that cannot be manufactured by worldly means. It is described as a form of heavenly reassurance sent by God to the believers in moments of fear, anxiety, and uncertainty. It is a tranquility that does not come from controlling circumstances, but from surrendering to the one who controls all things. When Sakinah descends, it silences the noise of doubt within the soul and anchors the heart firmly in faith. It becomes a shield against emotional instability, a spiritual force that produces confidence, hope, and emotional resilience. This divine tranquility is a testimony that peace is not earned by personal effort alone, but granted as a result of alignment with divine will, obedience, and remembrance of the Creator. This concept of tranquility emphasizes that true peace is not an external condition, but an internal gift. Sakinah is often experienced when the heart is in connection with God through prayer, reflection, and trust. In times of difficulty, when fear surrounds the believer, this tranquility descends as a soft yet powerful reassurance that they are not alone, that their Lord is present, and that every hardship has a purpose. It is a peace that whispers strength into weakness, calm into panic, hope into despair. This kind of tranquility cannot be stolen by external chaos because its source is divine and inexhaustible. The world may be filled with turbulence, but when divine tranquility rests upon the heart, it becomes a calm sea in the midst of roaring waves. A sanctuary untouched by the storm. Sakinah is not passive. It carries spiritual energy that empowers the believer to stand firm in their conviction, to continue striving, and to maintain trust in God's guidance even when the path is unclear. It is a tranquility that produces courage, because when the heart is at rest in the assurance of divine support, fear loses its authority. It is not simply a feeling of peace, but a supernatural composure, a quiet strength that refuses to yield to panic. This tranquility is not found in detachment from reality, but in connection to the ultimate reality, the certainty that God is with those who believe and rely on Him. It is a peace that allows the believer to persevere through hardship without breaking internally. In the Qur'anic concept of tranquility, remembrance of God plays a central role. The heart is described as finding rest in the remembrance of its Creator, as though it was created with a spiritual code that only divine remembrance can activate fully. When the believer remembers God, peace is not something they search for externally. It rises from within, filling every corner of their heart with stillness. This remembrance aligns the human soul with the divine rhythm, where faith dissolves fear and certainty replaces doubt. The tranquility that flows from remembrance is not temporary. It becomes a sustained state, a continual atmosphere of calm even during life's battles. Divine tranquility is also tied to trust, known as tawakkul, meaning reliance upon God. When the heart submits fully, trusting that God's plan is perfect even when it is not fully understood, a profound tranquility is released. The act of surrender becomes the gateway to peace. The believer no longer struggles to control every outcome, but rests in the assurance that they are under divine care. This kind of surrender is not defeat. It is spiritual empowerment. It transforms fear into faith, anxiety into assurance, restlessness into rootedness. Even when the outcome is unknown, the believer is at peace because they are anchored in the one who knows all outcomes. Sakinah is often associated with moments of trial, reflecting that divine tranquility is most visible in adversity. When people without divine connection panic, the believer covered in tranquility stands unfazed, not because the trial is easy, but because their heart is secured. It is as though divine peace becomes a spiritual armor that guards the heart from emotional destruction. Even in moments of external chaos, the internal world remains unshaken. This tranquility becomes the ultimate evidence of divine companionship. It is a form of spiritual intimacy, where the believer feels the nearness of the Creator so deeply that worry has no room to grow. The Qur'anic concept of tranquility also shapes the believer's lifestyle. It teaches that peace is not something to chase, but something that descends when one aligns their life with divine purpose. It emphasizes obedience, righteousness, and moral discipline as pathways to experiencing continual tranquility. When the believer lives in accordance with divine teachings, their conscience is at rest, their soul is aligned with truth, and their inner world becomes a place of spiritual harmony. Sin, disobedience, and doubt create turbulence within the heart, but submission, faith, and remembrance open the door to tranquility. This tranquility is not just personal, it strengthens communities. When believers are filled with Sakinah, they are not quick to anger, not controlled by fear, and not driven by impulsive reactions. They reflect stability, wisdom, and compassion. Their presence brings peace to others because they carry peace within themselves. A believer rooted in divine tranquility becomes a source of comfort for those around them, a beacon of calm in moments of collective fear. Ultimately, this concept of tranquility in the Qur'an reminds the believer that peace is not a human invention but a divine bestowal. The world may offer temporary distractions, momentary comforts, or fleeting escapes, but none of these can match the depth of tranquility that descends from the divine presence. Tranquility becomes the proof of faith working within the heart, the evidence that the believer is not walking alone, and the spiritual atmosphere that keeps the heart firm even when the path is difficult. When Sakinah rests on a person, they do not just feel peace, they carry peace, reflect peace, and walk through life with a divine calm that no earthly turbulence can steal. Faith stands as the great bridge between human anxiety and heavenly assurance, forming a powerful spiritual pathway that leads the troubled heart out of restlessness and into a realm of divine certainty. Every human faces seasons of fear, worry, confusion, and inner turmoil, moments where logic fails, strength fades, and clarity disappears. It is in these moments that faith steps forward, not as a weak hope or fragile belief, but as a firm conviction rooted in divine truth. Faith is not just believing that God exists, it is trusting that He is actively engaged, fully aware, and absolutely faithful in His promises. It is the anchor that secures the soul when storms rise, the bridge that carries the believer from distress into rest, from panic into peace, from anxiety into assurance. Without faith, the heart remains vulnerable to the fluctuations of emotion and the uncertainties of life. But with faith, even the darkest valley can be walked with quiet confidence. Human anxiety often rises from uncertainty. Uncertainty about the future, about outcomes, about the unknown. Faith does not necessarily remove the unknown, but it redefines how the unknown is perceived. Instead of seeing uncertainty as a void filled with fear, faith sees it as a space filled with God's presence and guidance. The believer begins to say, I may not know how this ends, but I know who is with me. And that alone becomes enough to silence the voice of panic. Anxiety may still knock at the door, but faith answers it with assurance, reminding the heart that divine wisdom is greater than human understanding. Faith transforms fear of what is unseen into trust in the one who sees all. Faith is a spiritual force that does not bow to circumstances. It challenges worry with the certainty of divine promises. When anxiety whispers, what if things go wrong? Faith responds, even if I walk through the valley, I will not fear, for I am not walking alone. This spiritual confidence does not come from positive thinking, but from divine assurance. It is not a denial of reality, but a declaration of a greater reality, one where God's sovereignty overrules chaos and His promises outweigh fears. Faith stands in the gap between what is happening and what is promised, holding the believer steady until the tranquility of the divine fills the heart completely. Faith also has a way of quieting the inner dialogue of worry. When the heart is flooded with anxious thoughts, faith redirects the mind toward what is true, what is eternal, and what is guaranteed by divine authority. The believer no longer meditates on the worst-case scenario, but begins to meditate on divine faithfulness. The more one focuses on God's promises, the smaller anxiety becomes. Faith shifts attention from the magnitude of the problem to the greatness of the one who holds the solution. As faith deepens, it becomes a shield that guards the heart from being consumed by anxiety, a bridge that transports the soul into a place of calm assurance, where peace is no longer a pursuit but a possession. Faith is not passive, it is an active force that moves the believer to take steps even when the path is unclear. It acts as a bridge that gives courage to move forward, trusting that every step will be supported by divine guidance. Anxiety paralyzes, but faith mobilizes. It gives the believer strength to act without fear, to speak with confidence, to hold on with patience. Faith says, I do not walk by sight but by trust, and in doing so it shifts the believer from a life directed by fear to a life directed by divine assurance. This movement of faith creates spiritual momentum that carries the heart away from the prison of anxiety. Faith is also built through remembrance. Remembering past victories, past moments of divine intervention, past times when what seemed impossible became possible by divine power. Each remembered victory lays another plank on the bridge of faith, making it stronger, more reliable, and more unshakable. As faith strengthens, anxiety loses its grip. The believer begins to stand firm in the confidence that God, who has proven faithful before, will be faithful again. The bridge of faith becomes a familiar path, one the believer walks with increasing confidence every time anxiety tries to pull them back into panic. Heavenly assurance is the destination at the end of this faith bridge. It is the place where the heart rests, knowing that divine timing is perfect, divine love is unfailing, divine provision is certain, and divine oversight is continuous. When faith completes its journey, anxiety has no room left to exist. Peace becomes the dominant internal reality. Even in the midst of uncertainty, the believer rests in the certainty of God's character. Assurance is not the absence of challenges, but the presence of unwavering trust. It is the deep conviction that everything is held together by the one who never fails. It is a quiet inner voice that says, I don't need to understand everything. I just need to trust the one who does. Faith also aligns the believer's emotions with divine truth. Anxiety often comes from allowing emotions to lead, but faith takes the lead and commands emotions to follow. When faith rises, fear retreats. When trust increases, worry diminishes. Faith becomes the governing authority within the heart, speaking louder than fear, stronger than despair, and clearer than doubt. Heavenly assurance then becomes a state of being rather than a fleeting moment. The believer is no longer tossed by emotional waves, but stands firm on the unshakable foundation of divine truth. This faith-driven assurance also impacts how decisions are made. Instead of decisions being shaped by fear of failure or anxiety about the future, they are guided by conviction and confidence. Faith sees opportunities where anxiety sees danger. It steps forward where fear hesitates. It speaks boldly where insecurity remains silent. This shift transforms not just the inner world but also the outward life. Because choices made in faith lead to peace-filled outcomes, while choices made in anxiety often result in regret and unrest. Faith, therefore, becomes the great connector, the bridge that carries the believer out of emotional chaos and into divine calm. It does not eliminate life's challenges, but ensures that the believer does not face those challenges alone or in fear. It turns every moment of anxiety into an opportunity to lean deeper into divine assurance. As this connection strengthens, peace becomes consistent, calm becomes natural, and trust becomes instinctive. The believer walks with a quiet strength, speaks with a confident calm, and lives in a state of inward rest, even when walking through outward turbulence. Faith makes the heart unshakable because it is held by the one who cannot be shaken. Spiritual authority plays a vital role in silencing inner storms and establishing peace within the soul. For when an individual understands their divine authority, they no longer allow fear, anxiety, or emotional turbulence to dictate their inner atmosphere. A person without understanding of spiritual authority often becomes a victim of their thoughts, feelings, and external pressures, tossed around like a ship without an anchor. But one who knows their position in divine truth stands firm, speaking peace into chaos rather than waiting for peace to appear. Spiritual authority is not arrogance or self-confidence. It is the confidence that comes from knowing who you are in relation to the divine and what power has been entrusted to you to overcome inner and outer battles. It is the realization that peace is not just a gift you receive, but a reality you have the power to enforce in your life. When aligned with divine, when individuals operate in spiritual authority, they do not surrender to panic. They take hold of inner storms and command them to cease, not in their own strength, but in the assurance that divine presence has given them the right to declare calm over their emotional seas. Where fear tries to rise, authority speaks truth. Where anxiety attempts to dominate the heart, authority confronts it with assurance. Instead of reacting to life's turbulence, a spiritually authoritative person responds with a calm conviction that peace is their inheritance and inner stability is not dependent on circumstances. This authority empowers them to regulate their internal environment by aligning their thoughts and declarations with divine promises rather than emotional distortions. Spiritual authority is expressed through words, thoughts, and posture. It is the ability to speak peace over oneself and trust that divine power backs that declaration. Many individuals allow negative inner voices to dominate their thinking, feeding anxiety and doubt. But spiritual authority flips the script, challenging destructive thoughts with truth and refusing to let fear script the narrative of one's life. Instead of saying, "I am overwhelmed," authority says, "I am strengthened." Instead of internalizing fear, authority internalizes faith. This shift in language and belief shapes the emotional climate, inviting peace to reign where stormy winds once blew violently. Authority transforms internal dialogue from one of defeat to one of victory, paving the way for tranquility to flood the soul. Understanding spiritual authority also involves knowing that peace is a divine right granted to those who align themselves with eternal truth. This is not about denying reality, but recognizing a greater reality that stands above every fear-inducing situation. The spiritually authoritative person declares peace with conviction because they know that divine power is not only around them but within them, enabling them to overturn fear-based thinking. This authority allows them to stand against the inner whirlwind of anxiety with unwavering certainty that they are supported, sustained, and secured by a higher source. The storm may roar, but authority gives them the power to stand still and remain unshaken. Spiritual authority is developed through connection with the divine. It grows stronger as one spends time in prayer, meditation, and reflection on spiritual truths. The more the spirit aligns with divine wisdom, the more authority is accessed. Authority is not something one begs for, it is something one walks in by understanding their identity and the promises available to them. A heart that knows its spiritual authority does not collapse under pressure. Instead, it speaks life into dead situations, calm into chaos, and strength into weakness. This authority is what enables a person to sleep through storms of life, metaphorically speaking, because they know that the presence of divine power guarantees protection and peace. This authority also dismantles the roots of fear. Anxiety often arises when one feels powerless, but spiritual authority restores a sense of control, not over circumstances, but over one's internal response to them. When authority is exercised, fear is stripped of its influence, doubt is silenced, and panic is disarmed. Instead of spiraling mentally, the spiritually authoritative person roots themselves in unwavering truth, allowing that truth to become the foundation upon which peace firmly stands. Authority brings a mental shift from victimhood to victory, from fragility to fortitude, from instability to inner stability. Spiritual authority calls the individual to rise above emotions rather than be ruled by them. It is not wrong to feel fear, but it is destructive to let fear take command. Authority does not ignore emotions, it directs them. It speaks to the storm within, saying, "You will not control me," and aligns emotions under truth. With authority, one becomes a captain over their soul, steering it with assurance rather than letting it drift lost in the currents of fear. This kind of control is not self-reliance, but reliance on divine empowerment. Authority acknowledges weakness, but does not submit to it, choosing instead to walk in the strength provided by divine backing. This spiritual authority also affects how individuals face challenges. Instead of reacting impulsively when trials arise, they remain composed, knowing they hold peace as a powerful force within. They do not panic when problems surface. They respond with assurance that solutions are accessible because divine guidance is available. This stability intimidates fear and weakens anxiety because fear thrives on chaos while authority thrives on order. When order is established within the heart through authority, peace naturally follows. The spiritually authoritative person therefore becomes a carrier of peace, influencing their environment by projecting calm confidence. Authority also reshapes how one perceives adversity. Instead of seeing trials as threats, authority sees them as opportunities to exercise faith and reaffirm peace. Each inner storm becomes a moment to reinforce trust, to speak calm into chaos, and to demonstrate that peace is not dictated by external conditions. Through repeated practice, authority-trained individuals become unflappable in the face of crisis. They may feel pressure, but they do not collapse under it. Their peace becomes a testimony that authority backed by divine truth is greater than any emotional storm. Spiritual authority also extends beyond personal peace, enabling individuals to bring calm into the lives of others. When someone walks in authority, their words carry weight. They speak to anxious hearts and inspire them to believe again. Their presence becomes a refuge for those who are overwhelmed. They do not simply carry peace, they distribute it. People feel safe around them because their authority-driven calm creates a stabilizing effect. They influence atmospheres, turning fear-filled environments into grounds of faith and assurance. In essence, spiritual authority is the divine empowerment to establish peace where chaos tries to reign. It is the power to speak inner storms into silence, to reject fear's control, and to enforce tranquility within the soul. When authority is understood and exercised, peace is no longer something one waits for, it becomes something one manifests. Inner storms may attempt to rise, but authority ensures they never rule. Through spiritual authority, the heart becomes a place where peace is not a visitor but a resident, secured by the firm conviction that divine presence has given the right to command calm even in the fiercest emotional battles.